Trapped in an elevator with a mysterious CEO, the humble teacher tries to stay calm, without imagining that fate has played a trick on her. The man beside her is none other than the father of her future baby. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. A cold gust of wind rattled the glass doors at the entrance to the towering Wellsburg Corporate Center that evening. It was almost midnight, and most employees had long since abandoned their offices for the comfort of their homes. Only the faint hum of fluorescent lights in the lobby and the distant echo of footsteps reminded anyone present that work never truly slept in a building like this. In the center of the gleaming marble floor stood Grace Sullivan, an unassuming figure dwarfed by the cavernous lobby. With her hair pinned into a loose chignon and her modest cardigan buttoned tight against the chill, she clutched a stack of revision notes, her breath fogging in the cold air. Grace was a teacher in the city's public school system, fighting each day to bring a bit of hope and knowledge to her overcrowded classroom. Tonight she looked more fragile than ever, her usual posture weighed down by exhaustion from grading papers late into the night. Yet behind that delicate appearance was someone who had never once run from responsibility. Grace had grown up in foster care, moving from one small town to another, never planting roots before she was moved again. Each makeshift home taught her a new lesson in humility and resilience. By the time she turned 18, she was determined to break the cycle and make a better life for herself. College scholarships and relentless discipline shaped her into a fiercely capable teacher, the kind that arrived early, stayed late, and did everything she could to support her students. But the intensity of her dedication often meant she gave little time to herself. That same sense of commitment had led her here, to a tutoring session for a student whose mother worked in this colossal office building. Grace had hesitated to come so late. Ferrying subways across the city after dark was never fun, but once again she couldn't find it in herself to say no. So she remained behind, finishing the extra lesson with a bright but struggling teenager who found solace in mathematics only when it was explained by Ms. Sullivan. Now the tutoring session finished, Grace stood alone, waiting for the ancient elevator that serviced the building's upper floors. The security guard at the front desk, an older man named Tom, had kindly offered her a thermos of tea just a few minutes earlier. "You'll catch a cold in this draft," he had said, worry creasing his brow. Grace appreciated his kindness. She could sense he wanted to escort her up, but the phone at his desk had rung with an urgent call he couldn't ignore. She'd reassured him she was fine on her own and walked off with a polite smile. The doors to the elevator slid open with a metallic clank. After stepping inside, Grace pressed the button for the 24th floor. She lived in a world where old structures occasionally malfunctioned, and the slow creaking of these elevator doors sent a nervous flutter through her, but she inhaled deeply to steady herself. If she could keep a class of 30 restless kids engaged, she could certainly handle a short ride up and down a corporate tower in the middle of the night. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to her, someone else was about to take the same elevator. Nathaniel Hayes, the mysterious and famously aloof CEO of Hayes Tech Innovations, strode across the lobby with purposeful steps. Known to the public as Nate Hayes, he was a figure of constant speculation in business magazines and media tabloids. Some articles depicted him as a visionary genius who'd built an entire technology empire from scratch. Others portrayed him as a ruthless businessman who had no qualms about shutting down entire departments and laying off hundreds if it meant saving the bottom line. In truth, Nathaniel had never expected to see anyone in his building this late. He often chose to work odd hours, cloistering himself away in his private top-floor office, analyzing the day's data and mapping out expansions. Nathaniel prided himself on anticipating events, whether in the market or in his personal life. But tonight he had let the swirl of memories and regrets get to him, memories he rarely allowed himself to revisit. As a result, the calm front he typically wore like armor was beginning to crack. The elevator doors were just about to close when he caught sight of them from across the lobby. With a small surge of adrenaline, he lunged forward, slipping his hand between the doors at the last second. Grace barely had time to process the flash of movement before the doors slid open again. In stepped Nathaniel Hayes, tall and striking in a tailored suit, his expression tense as though he were wrestling with thoughts he couldn't quite shake. He didn't glance at Grace at first. His gaze remained fixed on the overhead floor indicator as if it contained the answers to his internal storms. It was only when the elevator gave a sudden jolt that he blinked and became aware of the woman at his side. Grace offered him a polite if timid smile. It was late, and he had the aura of someone not in the mood for conversation, so she said nothing. She just shifted her stack of revision notes from one arm to the other and stepped slightly back to give him space. Nathaniel was used to people either falling over themselves to greet him or, if they recognized him at all, suffocating him with questions about business deals. But this woman merely looked polite, if a bit cautious. The elevator began its ascent with an unsettling clunk. It traveled only a few floors when, abruptly, the lights flickered. Grace's eyes darted up at the overhead lamp, pulse quickening. A split second later, the entire car jolted to a stop. Silence. Darkness swallowed them, except for a faint emergency bulb that glowed overhead in a weak yellowish light. Nathaniel pressed the panel buttons several times, but nothing responded. He leaned in and tried the emergency call button. Another flicker of the overhead light. No sound. No comforting beep or mechanical hum. Nothing. Grace exhaled slowly, trying to remain calm. She'd read somewhere that modern elevators didn't tend to drop from cables in emergencies, but that knowledge didn't stop the coil of dread from winding in her stomach. She forced a smile, half directed at Nathaniel, half to steady herself. "Looks like it's stuck," she said quietly, keeping her voice steady. Her immediate instinct was to appear unafraid. Logic told her that it wasn't truly free-falling, just jammed in place. But the old, battered contraption and her rattled nerves told a different story. Nathaniel, swallowing whatever apprehension he felt, stepped closer to the control panel. His jaw tightened as he pressed the help button again, more forcefully this time. Silence. He rapped on the door. No answer. He tried the emergency phone in a small compartment near the buttons. Dead. The only reply he got was a faint static that vanished almost as soon as it appeared. In the hush, Grace noticed the smell of his cologne, a subtle, sophisticated blend that contrasted sharply with the stale odor of the elevator. She saw the rigid line of his shoulders and realized he was maintaining composure with the same effort she was. In different circumstances, she might have wondered about the man next to her. It wasn't often she encountered someone with such a commanding aura. But for the moment, the only thing that mattered was that they were locked in a malfunctioning elevator, with no sign of rescue. The building was large, nearly 30 stories high, with only a skeleton crew of overnight security. The hour was so late that even those who worked the second shift had gone home. Tom, the security guard, would be at the front desk, but how quickly would he realize they were stuck? And in such an old system, was there even a reliable alarm? Minutes passed like hours. Grace tried to remain still and composed so as not to feed her own anxiety. She remembered her classroom training, how to keep calm in front of students so that they, too, would remain calm. She inhaled and exhaled, focusing on the same methodical breath she taught her kids for test day nerves. Nathaniel noticed her trembling anyway. "Hey," he said quietly, turning to face her for the first time. "It'll be okay." The words surprised even him. His usual manner was distant and concise. But seeing a shadow of fear in her eyes stirred something protective within him that he never let surface. She gave a short nod in reply, grateful. "I know," she said, eyes on the door as though she could will it open through sheer force. "I just—" Before she could finish, the elevator lurched again. Grace stumbled, and Nathaniel automatically reached out, his hand encircling her arm in a firm but gentle grip, preventing her from falling. In that moment, their eyes locked for the first time. and though the flickering overhead emergency light offered only the dimmest glow, each caught a glimpse of something behind the other's gaze, an unspoken story, a fleeting vulnerability. What neither of them realized was how profound that moment truly was. For Grace Sullivan, who had never considered that her future might involve more than just teaching and trying to survive month to month, this was the night fate would quietly rewrite her life. For Nathaniel Hayes, whose carefully orchestrated existence left no room for the unexpected, destiny was about to carve out a brand new path. And for the child that would soon shape both their worlds, this was the first step in a story that had already begun, though neither parent yet knew. "Are you all right?" Nathaniel asked gently, releasing Grace once he saw she was steady on her feet. She swallowed hard, cheeks flushed not just from fear but from the closeness of this tall, commanding stranger. Yes," she managed. "Thank you." The overhead bulb flickered once more, then stabilized in a faint glow. In that dim circle of light, they looked at each other, a humble teacher with no illusions about her place in the world, and a mysterious CEO haunted by secrets he never intended to share. Neither knew in that instant that they were both about to become tied by a bond far stronger than any vow or contract. All they understood was that the elevator had trapped them together, with no immediate sign of rescue. A low buzz of static crackled from the elevator speaker. It was faint, barely audible in the tight stillness, but Grace latched onto it like a lifeline. Perhaps the battered system was struggling to reconnect to the building's power or the security desk. Standing on her toes, she spoke into the microphone grate. "Hello? Can anyone hear me?" Her tone was steady, yet behind it trembled the hope that someone outside their confined metal box might hear and answer. Nathaniel pressed his ear to the speaker, tapping gently with his fingertips. He frowned when the static died out. No reply. The overhead light seemed to flicker in response, but the moment came and went without so much as a beep of acknowledgement. Grace exhaled slowly. She fiddled with the corner of her stack of notes, trying not to crumple the pages. "At least the elevator's not pitching us up and down," she ventured, attempting a small smile. "That means the brake system is holding, right?" He nodded, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "Modern elevators have fail-safes," he replied, his voice an even baritone that somehow conveyed both confidence and underlying anxiety. "We shouldn't drop, assuming everything is still functioning as intended." She couldn't help but notice his guarded phrasing. "As intended," Grace repeated, letting the words hang in the stale air. The building was old. Tom, the security guard, had admitted as much, calling it a relic that needed an overhaul. Why a man like Nathaniel Hayes would choose to be in such a place after midnight gave her pause. But she held back her questions. It seemed intrusive to ask too much of a man she'd only met 5 minutes earlier. Nevertheless, an awkward silence threatened to settle. Grace remembered her vow to keep calm under pressure, just as she did whenever a crisis erupted with her students, and decided to gently break the tension. "So," she asked, sliding her notes into her purse for safekeeping, "were you working late too?" Nathaniel shifted, pushing a hand through his dark hair. A faint line of stubble along his jaw hinted that he hadn't planned on being in the office this long. "Something like that," he answered. "I had a few unresolved details to handle." He hesitated as though weighed down by the memory of what those details might be. Instead of offering more, he turned the question back on her. "You said you're a teacher?" Grace's eyes lit up. Her students were the one topic that never failed to warm her face with a quiet glow. "Yes. Well, I teach middle school math at Riverway Public, and a bit of English tutoring on the side," she added with a modest shrug. "I was here tonight helping a student whose mother cleans offices on the upper floors. We did a special tutoring session so her daughter wouldn't fall behind." He arched an eyebrow. Quite the dedication. A flicker of genuine admiration softened his gaze. Then, almost self-consciously, he schooled his features back into something more neutral. "What grade?" "Seventh," Grace replied, shifting the strap of her purse on her shoulder. They're at that age where they're still figuring out who they want to be. Some days they're sweet and curious. Other days, well... She let out a wry laugh, recalling the pranks and minor rebellions she regularly dealt with. "I love them, though. It's never dull." Nathaniel nodded politely. He could sense her devotion, an earnestness he found disarming. In his world, cynicism often disguised itself as politeness, and sincerity was a rare trait. Grace Sullivan, on the other hand, seemed sincere to her core. Time stretched out, punctuated only by an occasional groan of metal. The small emergency light overhead gave just enough illumination to notice each other's expressions. With every passing minute, the elevator air grew a little heavier, and Grace could feel a twinge of claustrophobia. She stepped closer to the doors, pressing her ear to the seam. Was that a voice out there, or just the hum of the ventilation system? Eventually, Grace lifted her eyes. "We can't just stand here hoping someone notices. Tom, our security guard, he's definitely at his desk, but if the phone lines or speaker are down..." Nathaniel stepped forward, trying the emergency button again, more insistently this time. When no answer came, he sighed, setting his hand against the panel with frustration. "You're right. We need to try something else. Maybe if we pry the doors open an inch or so, we can shout for help." A warning quivered in the back of Grace's mind. Wasn't it dangerous to force elevator doors open if they were stuck between floors? Still, they had few options. "Let's see if we can figure out how high up we are," she suggested. She carefully slid her fingertips between the metal seams, bracing herself for an electric shock or a jolt. Nothing. The doors didn't budge, as though jammed by a mechanical lock. Nathaniel joined her. His natural strength became evident as his muscles tensed, trying to nudge the door. He paused, looked around for something, anything they might use as leverage. Spotting an old fire extinguisher tucked beneath the control panel, he crouched down to retrieve it. "Stand back," he warned gently. He wedged the metal lip of the extinguisher into the crack, applying steady pressure. Grace could tell he was giving it all he had. His jaw clenched, the veins at his temple visible. For a brief second, the door trembled, squeaking in protest, but it remained firmly sealed. "That's not budging," Grace observed, a sinking feeling in her stomach. The building's archaic security system might have locked down everything once the power glitch hit, or maybe a fuse had blown somewhere. "Guess we'll have to hope the external alarm is working after all." They exchanged a somber glance. The notion of being trapped in a silent tower with midnight already past cast a strange hush over them. Grace tried to lighten the moment. "If I'd known I'd be stuck in here, I'd have brought more than just some math tests to grade." She patted her bag. Her quiet humor earned a faint smile from Nathaniel. For a moment, the lines of tension on his face eased. He set the extinguisher aside and leaned back against the wall, exhaling a breath that carried more weight than mere fatigue. "Trust me, I'd have prepared better, too." Grace studied him, not meaning to pry but sensing an undercurrent of worry in the slight tremble of his voice. "Mind if I ask?" she ventured softly. "Are you always in the office this late, or was today special?" Nathaniel's gaze flicked upward, meeting hers. He recognized her question wasn't about business. She wasn't fishing for insider knowledge. It was genuine concern. That alone made him consider giving an honest answer. But vulnerability was unfamiliar territory. He hesitated, thinking of the regrets that had driven him to hunch over files until well past midnight, the deals that brought not just success, but a gnawing guilt. How could he possibly explain all that to a stranger? "It's complicated," he settled on with a tilt of his head. "Guess you could say I'm haunted by a few mistakes." Grace nodded. "We all are," she replied. Her tone carried a gentle understanding. She may have lived a world away from penthouse offices and corporate expansions, but she too had regrets and burdens she carried from her time in foster care. In the corner, a sudden mechanical thump made both of them jolt. They froze. Was it an indication the elevator had come back to life, or just another random spasm of the old equipment? Another heartbeat of silence, and then there it was again. A faint rattle that seemed to come from overhead. "I'll try banging on the walls," Grace said, stepping forward. She used the side of her fist, tapping firmly. "Hello? Is anyone there?" She paused, listening. Nothing. She knocked harder, calling out for Tom or any passing maintenance worker. The hush remained unbroken. At last, Nathaniel gently drew her hand back to keep her from bruising her knuckles. "Easy," he said quietly. "We don't want you hurting yourself." He studied the battered speaker again, pressing the button meticulously. Still no sign of life. Every so often, Grace's mind leapt to Robin, one of her 7th graders who joked that Ms. Sullivan always reminded them to Plan B everything. She could practically hear his voice, half laughing at the predicament, but inside she felt a swirl of apprehension she'd rarely experienced. The building might not be wholly abandoned, but it certainly felt that way. Out of habit, she checked her cell phone for signal yet again, only to confirm what she already knew. A single bar teased at the corner of the screen, then vanished. Nathaniel fished out his own phone. No luck. The reinforced steel and concrete around them was effectively blocking any chance of contact. He dropped his phone into his jacket pocket. "We can wait a bit longer," he said, though the words carried a forced optimism. "If the alarm sensors upstairs or downstairs register a malfunction, building management or the fire department should be alerted." "I hope so," Grace murmured. She pushed away a creeping sense of dread. She thought about her small apartment across town, barely large enough for a table, a couch, and a stack of books. Her cat, Murphy, would be mewling at the door for food. And come tomorrow morning, she had a staff meeting scheduled at 7 a.m. But all of that felt like a distant reality, overshadowed by the claustrophobic present. Another flicker of the overhead light. She glanced at Nathaniel, noticing how he stood with his arms folded, as if physically holding himself together. His suit jacket was undone, revealing the crisp lines of a vest and tie. He looked every bit the successful CEO, but behind that veneer, Grace could see a man wrestling with his own demons. The silence in the elevator thickened, almost humming with the weight of unspoken thoughts. Grace turned back toward the panel, pressing the call button once more, this time keeping her finger firmly on it. "We're in elevator 2, she said clearly, half hoping some cosmic wave would carry her voice across the lines. "We're stuck between floors. Please, if someone's there, help." Her words echoed softly, swallowed by the dim space. Nathaniel closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the wall. He pictured his own father, a man who had tried to shape him into a stoic successor. "Never let them see you sweat," was practically a family motto. But right now, faced with an unpredictable mechanical failure and an unfamiliar sense of responsibility for the trembling teacher beside him, he couldn't bury all emotion. At last, Grace broke the hush. "Maybe we should at least introduce ourselves," she said with a shaky laugh that tried to mask her nerves. "I'm Grace Sullivan. It's nice to meet you, even if the circumstances are a little, claustrophobic." He managed a faint smile, an apology lying behind his gray eyes. "Nathaniel Hayes," he replied. And though he didn't add more, the name alone sparked a reaction in Grace. She'd heard it before. Hayes Tech was a brand repeated on the news from time to time, rumored to be investing in urban development projects. She'd seen glimpses on billboards featuring that surname in bold letters, but she'd never imagined meeting the man behind that empire, let alone in an elevator at midnight. Something in her expression must have changed because he caught it. "Yes," he affirmed quietly. "That Hayes." Grace found her voice, swallowing any assumptions she might have. "Well, I suppose fate decided we both needed an unscheduled break. She offered a reassuring nod. We'll get out of here. And maybe in the meantime, we can forget we're strangers. Nathaniel exhaled, an unspoken relief that she wasn't diving into prying questions or starstruck flattery. I appreciate that, he said, his voice unexpectedly sincere. Truth is, Grace, I don't have many people I can talk to these days. She cocked her head in gentle curiosity. Well, you do now, she answered, and though she couldn't articulate why, she felt a growing sense of empathy, perhaps something deeper. Her pulse still pounded with the anxiety of their predicament, but a flicker of warmth had ignited in the gloom, a sense of hope that together they might endure this night's peculiar test. Nathaniel pressed his back against the paneled wall, silently observing Grace while she rummaged through her bag in search of something, anything, that might help. She still seemed a little shaken, but each time the elevator creaked or the light flickered, she forced her focus onto productive tasks. Checking her phone, tapping the speaker buttons, reassuring him and herself that rescue would arrive. It was, in many ways, an echo of how she described dealing with her students, always poised, always turning fear into action. For a moment, he watched her without speaking. A pang of something almost like guilt tugged at him. The brand Hayes Tech was plastered across countless electronics, software solutions, and even infrastructure projects throughout the city. Despite that, here they were, stuck in a building old enough to belong in a museum with half its systems barely limping along. If he had any sense, he thought, he might have poured money into upgrading this tower long ago, but that was the trouble with regrets. They were always clearest in hindsight. Finally, Grace emerged triumphant with a small LED flashlight. She clicked it on, testing the narrow beam in the musty darkness. "Look," she said softly, shining it at the top portion of the panel. "The instructions say we can open the emergency hatch if the car is at a complete stop and power is cut. But that'd mean climbing onto the elevator's roof." Her lips parted anxiously. "I'm not sure we should be messing with that. Could be dangerous." Nathaniel considered the idea. He thought of countless action movie scenes where the hero scaled elevator cables. This was reality, though. He wasn't about to risk their lives if the structure was unstable. "I've heard horror stories about people trying that," he agreed, giving the ceiling a wary glance. "Besides, if there's a mechanical failure, the last place I want to be is halfway up the cables." Grace exhaled, relief mingling with her frustration. Right. Best to stay put. Maybe try to conserve energy. Her fingertips grazed the corner of the flashlight, as if she might turn it off at any second to preserve the battery. The overhead bulb was so weak, the flashlight provided a comforting supplement. A faint rumble echoed through the steel shaft. Grace held her breath, listening intently. After a beat, the rumble faded out again, leaving them with little more than a sense of tense anticipation. She sank down to sit on the floor, carefully tucking her legs to the side. When she looked up at Nathaniel, he was still standing, arms crossed. "You might as well sit," she suggested gently. "We may be here for a while." He glanced at the floor, seemingly reluctant to relinquish that upright stance of control, but exhaustion, the weight of a sleepless night and countless burdens, compelled him to yield. He slid down, resting his back against the wall, leaving a foot or so of space between them. Enough to maintain a measure of polite distance, but close enough that if either were to speak in a hushed tone, the other would hear clearly. Grace leaned her head against the panel, eyes half-lidded. "I hope Tom's all right," she mused. "He's usually so alert, but maybe he had an emergency or stepped away. If he knew we were stuck, I'm sure he'd have called maintenance or the fire department by now." Nathaniel finished the thought. "He seemed like a good guy from the few times I've passed him in the lobby, always greeting people." The corners of his mouth twitched into something that resembled a smile. "You said you know him well?" She nodded. "He's like the building's unofficial grandfather, always worried about everyone who works late shifts or comes in after hours." I tutor his granddaughter sometimes, free of charge. He insisted on paying, but I couldn't bring myself to take money from him. He's done so many small kindnesses, like offering me hot tea or walking me to my car if I leave too late. Nathaniel listened, intrigued. In his world, every transaction was precise. People were paid for services, profit margins were carefully measured. Yet here was Grace, talking about giving away lessons because it felt morally right. The concept, while not foreign, felt strangely distant from how his life had been structured for as long as he could remember. They drifted into a companionable silence, each lost in thought. Eventually, Grace glanced over at him. "Do you mind if I ask?" She paused, gently choosing her words. "Why you're still here at this old building? Don't most corporate owners move on to more modern headquarters?" Nathaniel let out a low breath, raking a hand through his hair. "It's not an easy answer," he confessed. "I own other properties, newer ones, sleeker, more efficient. This place belonged to my mother's side of the family years ago. My father had it gutted and refurbished a few times, but it was never truly modern. Even so, it was the site of some of my earliest memories as a child. I guess there's a sentimental attachment." Grace's expression softened. She leaned forward slightly, as if drawn in by the faint crack in his guarded demeanor. "Nothing wrong with a little sentiment, especially for the place your family built." A storm of memories flickered through Nathaniel's mind. Him as a boy, hiding behind marble columns, watching important men and women step in and out of offices. His mother's gentle smile as she tried to quell his anxieties about living up to the Hayes name. Later, the echo of his father's voice scolding him to show no weakness. And then that day, he pressed the memory down. He couldn't talk about that, not here, not now. "Anyway," he murmured, changing the subject before he sank further, "I guess I never truly let it go." Grace studied his profile. Behind the aura of quiet power, there was a man grappling with guilt and old wounds. She recognized the signs. In her own past, she'd encountered those who masked their pain behind stoicism, especially in the foster system. Some kids became bullies, some acted out, but the heartbreak always stemmed from the same place: fear of abandonment, fear of not living up to some invisible standard. "What about you?" he asked, as though sensing her thoughts. "You said you grew up in different towns. Did you ever get the chance to settle someplace that felt like home?" Her lips curved slightly at the question. "It took me a long time to figure out what home really meant," she admitted. "Bounced around in foster care. Always the new kid, new rules, new families. Then, once I got to college, I realized I was free to decide for myself. Where do I belong? After graduation, I landed a teaching job in the city, found a tiny apartment near the school, and I guess that's it. That's my piece of the world." A faint pang echoed in her chest as she recalled those early days of standing at the campus gates, waiting for someone who'd never come. But she forced herself to remember how far she'd come since then, the life she'd built with her own hands. Nathaniel's gaze softened with empathy. "That's admirable," he said, meaning it. "You carved out your place in the world. Not many people have the willpower to do that." After all, he thought privately, wasn't he someone who had grown up with every advantage, yet spent years feeling cornered by expectations? The elevator gave another shudder, pulling them both back to the present crisis. Grace turned her flashlight to the control panel, scanning for any blinking light or sign of reactivation. There was none. The hush returned, heavier now that it had gone on so long. A wave of weariness washed over her, and she let her eyes drift shut for a moment just to rest them. Nathaniel watched her, noticing how the lines of tension around her mouth relaxed as she briefly dozed. He felt an unexpected protectiveness welling up. He didn't want anything to happen to her. Ridiculous, he scolded himself. She was a grown woman, resourceful in her own right. Still, his chest tightened at the idea of letting her down. Gradually, he let his own eyelids close, just for a moment's respite. Thoughts wove in and out of his consciousness. the deal he had concluded earlier that night, the lingering phone calls left unreturned, the envelope of documents back in his top-floor office that he had to finalize. But more than that, he found himself thinking about Grace, her calm presence, the way she carried compassion so effortlessly. It was like a balm on the restlessness that had plagued him for months, years even. Time was lost in that lull. Whether it was minutes or an hour, neither Grace nor Nathaniel could be sure. The only sign that anything changed was the distant sound of footsteps from beyond the doors, a muffled shuffle that might have been the echo of someone in the hallway. Grace's eyes snapped open. She quickly nudged Nathaniel. "Did you hear that?" They both scrambled to their feet, pulses racing with renewed hope. "Hello?" Nathaniel called, rapping on the door. "We're trapped in here. Elevator 2. Do you hear us?" Grace joined him, banging with her flashlight. "Help! Please! We're stuck!" For a moment it seemed they might finally get an answer. Then the footsteps faded away, as if the person either hadn't heard or had chosen not to stop. Deflation hit Grace so hard she nearly pressed her forehead against the cold metal door. "How can they not hear us?" she whispered, voice tight with frustration. "The acoustics in these hallways are terrible, but still." Nathaniel's jaw clenched in similar disappointment. "We just have to keep trying," he said in a low voice, though the reassurance didn't contain much energy. "Somebody will notice eventually." She nodded, stepping back to catch her breath. "I wish I could—" She paused mid-sentence, her eyes darting toward the ceiling. A faint beep from the speaker caught her attention. They both hurried to the control panel, hearts pounding. The beep came again, slightly louder this time, a brief burst of static as if an external feed was coming to life. Grace leaned in, pressing the call button. "Yes, we're here. Can anyone hear me?" A hiss of static, then silence. They exchanged a pained glance. The system was malfunctioning, teasing them with glimmers of hope. Grace shut her eyes, praying for that beep to return. But no voice materialized over the line, and the beep never repeated. Nathaniel, cursing under his breath, slammed a frustrated palm against the side of the panel. Grace laid a gentle hand on his arm, reminding him to keep calm. They'd accomplish nothing by succumbing to fury or fear. He exhaled, feeling the tension in his body coil tighter. "We'll get through this," he muttered, repeating what he'd told her earlier. Only now, it was as much a promise to himself as to her. Her lips quirked in a faint, tired smile. "We don't have a choice," she said. She settled back down on the floor, her back to the wall, and turned the flashlight beam on a small dent in the metal, something to focus on besides the pressing gloom. Nathaniel lowered himself beside her once again, shoulders nearly touching. In that shared hush, Grace realized that while she was physically trapped, a strange sense of emotional freedom was blossoming. Nathaniel Hayes, the stoic, mysterious man who owned half the city's technology, had shown vulnerability. She'd opened up about her own insecurities. They were strangers, yet at this moment, in an old elevator with no one else to turn to, they might just be forging a connection that neither would forget. And unknown to both of them, in the silent swirl of fate, the bond they formed tonight would ripple far beyond these claustrophobic walls. Soon enough, Grace's future, and Nathaniel's, would be tied together by far more than shared adrenaline and conversation. A single spark of possibility had ignited in the darkness, lighting a path neither had planned to walk. The hours crawled by in slow, agonizing increments. Grace and Nathaniel, still sitting on the scuffed elevator floor, had lapsed into stretches of tense silence broken only by the occasional sigh or soft cough. Despite their best efforts, knocking, shouting, pressing every button in a sequence of hopeful combinations, no one responded from the outside, and the overhead panel remained just as dark. At one point, the emergency bulb dimmed to a faint glow that threatened to plunge them into total blackness. A spark of alarm flashed across Grace's face, but when the light steadied again, she exhaled relief. I wonder if it's running on limited backup power, she murmured. If that dies. Nathaniel nodded, letting the dreaded possibility hang unsaid. If that little bulb failed, they'd be trapped in pitch darkness with only Grace's small flashlight to see by. He ran a hand over the back of his neck, feeling the prickle of stubble that always formed when he was too preoccupied to shave. An unexpected wave of exhaustion washed over him, and for a moment he longed to simply lean back and close his eyes, pretend he was anywhere else. Grace, noticing his weary expression, spoke gently. Would you like some water? She reached into her bag and produced a battered aluminum bottle. I brought it along for my tutoring sessions. Nathaniel's first instinct was to refuse, some ingrained reflex against appearing needy. But his throat was parched, and he accepted with a nod. Thank you. He took a small sip, mindful that they might have to ration whatever supplies they had. As he handed the bottle back, his gaze caught on the stack of papers in her bag. Math worksheets and carefully annotated lesson plans lay on top. He couldn't help a faint smile. You really carry all that around, even at midnight? Grace followed his line of sight, letting out a soft laugh. Comes with the job. I'm forever grading or prepping the next quiz. My students think I don't have a life outside school, she said, rolling her eyes playfully. But truth be told, sometimes it feels like I don't. She capped the water bottle, fiddling with the edge of her bag. Teaching it's everything to me. It's my purpose, you know. Nathaniel tilted his head, curiosity sparking. I get that, in a way. He paused, glancing toward the elevator doors as though half expecting them to slide open any moment. When they remained stubbornly sealed, he exhaled. If you'd asked me a few years ago what my purpose was, I'd have said building the Hayes Tech empire, expanding, acquiring, forging new directions. But the more success I had, the more I realized I was just fueling a machine my father started. Sometimes I'm not sure if it's truly me behind the wheel, or if I'm just following his old blueprint. Grace's eyes glimmered with quiet empathy. That's a heavy burden to carry. Always wondering if you're living your life or living someone else's plan. Nathaniel ran a thumb along the seam of his jacket. He seldom voiced these thoughts aloud, especially not to strangers. But something about Grace's open, accepting manner coaxed him onward. My father was tough. He never believed in second chances or vulnerability. Win or be forgotten, that was basically his motto. A haunted look crossed his features. Sometimes I wonder if there's a version of me that might have chosen a different path if I hadn't grown up in that environment. Grace rested her arms across her knees, feeling a wave of kinship with him. She too had grown up in circumstances she didn't choose, though hers was the precarious foster system, not a corporate dynasty. Still, the theme was the same, shaping one's future in the shadows of other people's expectations. It's not too late to discover what you actually want, she said gently. Life has a funny way of surprising us, even if it's inside a broken elevator. He let out a short laugh, a dry note of amusement resonating in the tight space. I guess we're prime examples of that tonight. Silence settled again, though it felt a touch lighter now, as if sharing these confessions had relieved a small part of the tension. Grace turned her flashlight off to conserve the batteries, trusting the dim overhead glow for the moment. Without that bright beam, the elevator seemed cozier, an odd thought given the circumstances, but it was as if the darkness encouraged them to speak more freely. Her stomach rumbled softly, and she pressed a hand to it, an embarrassed flush coloring her cheeks. Sorry, she mumbled, recalling she hadn't eaten since earlier in the afternoon. I usually grab something quick after tutoring, but didn't have the chance. Nathaniel glanced toward his own briefcase, which lay by his feet. I might have protein bars in here, or something. He unlatched it, shuffling through the pockets meant for tablets and documents. Emerging triumphantly, he held up a wrapped energy bar. Chocolate peanut crunch, From some meeting snack table, I think. Grace's face lit up, warmth sparking at the simple kindness. You're a lifesaver. She took the bar and carefully broke it in half, handing one piece back to him. We share. He offered no argument, simply accepting his portion with a slight smile. As they each ate in small, measured bites, the entire moment felt strangely intimate. Two people navigating a predicament that forced them into genuine closeness. The beep overhead startled them again. Both froze, energy bar forgotten as they whipped their heads toward the speaker. Static crackled. Then a rough voice broke through the line in staccato bursts. Power outage. Anyone stuck? Grace nearly sprang to her feet. She jabbed the call button. Yes, we're here. Elevator 2, we've been trapped for hours. Her voice echoed with relief and desperation. Hello? Can you hear me? Nathaniel pressed his ear against the speaker, hoping to glean any confirmation. Another wash of static hissed. They could almost make out a muffled phrase, Maintenance, on their way, hang, tight. Then the line fell silent again. Yes, Grace exclaimed, turning to Nathaniel with a grin, her first truly jubilant smile since this ordeal began. They know we're here. Despite the dryness in his throat, Nathaniel felt a thrill of relief course through him. Thank God, he breathed. Sounds like they're working on the power. With any luck, they'll get us out soon. She nodded, heart fluttering at the prospect of rescue. Yet, as her pulse hammered with excitement, a thread of uncertainty tugged at her as well. Odd how she had grown accustomed to the hush of this sealed car and the presence of this man whose life was so different from hers. We'll be out soon, she repeated quietly, more to herself than anyone else. Minutes ticked on. Grace and Nathaniel tried to remain poised, expecting the elevator to jolt into motion. At times they heard clanks, rattles, and the faint hum of someone working on the exterior doors. But each time they held their breath, hoping for movement. Nothing happened. Eventually they heard footsteps and muffled voices right outside. Hello? Grace called. She knocked on the metal panel again. We can hear you. Are you able to open it from your side? Silence. Then a man's voice came through faintly. Ma'am, we're trying. This system's old. Gotta cut the power to the entire elevator bank so we can access the manual brake. Just hold on. We're not sure how long it'll take, but we'll get you out. The idea of them cutting the power sent a chill down Grace's spine. Did that mean the lights would go out altogether? She exchanged a worried glance with Nathaniel. How long can your flashlight last? He asked under his breath. She clicked it back on, shining it at the metal doors where the voice had emerged. A few hours, hopefully. Let's pray we won't need that long. The faint sound of drilling and scraping resumed on the other side. Every so often the elevator door would quiver as if someone was prying it, but it never fully opened, and the jam at the top must have been especially stubborn. Amid the tension, Grace felt a wave of nausea and realized how hungry and tired she truly was, even after the half an energy bar. The adrenaline that had kept her alert was wearing off, leaving her shaky. For a fleeting moment, her mind jumped to those what-if scenarios. What if they got stuck so long that it became a real health risk? She banished the thought quickly, reminding herself they'd heard from rescue workers. This was real progress. Nathaniel, noticing the faint tremor in her hands, reached out, covering them with his own. Hey, he said softly. They're close. The worst part is behind us. In the dim reflection of the overhead light, his eyes looked determined, almost comforting. It was a stark contrast to the aloof, stoic aura he'd projected hours earlier. We'll be fine. She gazed at his hand over hers, a gentle warmth spreading. Thank you, she murmured. I know I must be acting silly. I've been in stressful situations, but this is different. Confined space, no windows, no sure timeline. She forced a laugh, trying to lighten the mood. It's strange. I've never liked small spaces. Reminds me of a closet I had to sleep in once, back in a foster home. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Compassion tugged at him. He realized that For her, the fear went deeper than mere claustrophobia. It was rooted in painful memories of feeling powerless, trapped. "You're not silly," he assured her. "Fear is normal, and you're handling it better than most people would." Grace nodded, blinking back an emotion she couldn't quite name. She almost felt guilty for being so vulnerable in front of him, but something about his voice and the gentle weight of his hand made it acceptable. "I'm just relieved someone finally answered. Knowing we're not alone, that's everything." They sat in a sort of reverent quiet for a few more moments, absorbing the news that help was on the way. The clangs and scraping from beyond the door continued intermittently, almost a mechanical lullaby in the darkness. Unexpectedly, a jolt like a half-second surge rattled the elevator. Grace let out a startled cry and Nathaniel grabbed the nearest wall. The floor dipped a fraction of an inch before stabilizing. Panicked shouts echoed from behind the metal. Someone was shouting to kill the power again. Grace's heartbeat thundered. She forced herself to breathe slowly. "Just them testing the manual release, right?" she asked, voice trembling. Nathaniel steadied her with a light hand on her shoulder. "Yeah, exactly that. They're just trying to realign it. We're okay." She closed her eyes, letting the tension seep out with each exhale. "I'd do anything for a normal, boring elevator ride right now," she joked weakly. He attempted a smile, though it felt heavy with his own anxiety. "You and me both." Minutes, possibly an hour, trickled by in a cycle of forced hope and deflating stillness. The thick cloud of exhaustion pressed on them. They remained side by side, leaning against the wall, occasionally whispering bits of speculation. Maybe they have to remove a panel from the hallway. Could they lower us to the next floor safely? Is the entire building's power compromised? But no matter how many times they guessed, the only real sign of progress was the repeated clang of tools and muffled voices outside, accompanied by the occasional fleeting hiss of static from the speaker. When Grace shifted to stretch her stiff legs, an accidental bump made their shoulders meet. She froze, feeling his warmth even through layers of clothing. He seemed equally aware of the contact, if the quick glance he gave her was any indication. A strange current passed between them, an unspoken bond formed by the night's ordeal and the bits of personal truth they'd shared. Eventually, Grace cleared her throat, looking away to quell the heat rising in her cheeks. "I guess if we have to be stuck somewhere, at least we can say we've made a new friend," she said gently, trying to phrase it in a casual way. But her heart pounded at the simple truth that she felt more than just cordial warmth. Something deeper loomed, a sense that this moment, this chance encounter, might alter her life. Nathaniel nodded. He wanted to find some breezy reply, but the words refused to come. Instead, he tucked that feeling away in his chest, letting his gaze linger on her for a quiet beat longer than necessary. Somewhere beyond the door, a final scraping noise sounded, followed by a triumphant shout. Grace and Nathaniel turned, hearts leaping. The call button crackled to life again, and a man's voice rang through more clearly than before. "Elevator 2, this is maintenance. We think we've got the mechanism freed up. Once we engage the override, the doors should open, or at least partially. We'll help you climb out, if necessary. Just be prepared. We're counting to 3. Grace couldn't believe it. Tears of relief stung at the corners of her eyes. She turned the flashlight back on, shining it toward the door. Nathaniel rose to his feet, offering her a hand to stand. Her fingers curled in his, and in the shift of that moment, unspoken gratitude and a flicker of something stronger passed between them. As the countdown began, 3, 2, 1, both braced themselves, hearts pounding. The ancient elevator groaned. The top hinges squealed. A snap of metal erupted near the door. Slowly, agonizingly, they heard the heavy panel begin to slide. "We see you!" a voice called from the gap. "Hang tight! It's almost open!" Grace's eyes filled with tears as the door inched wider, flooding the cramped space with the glare of hallway fluorescence. She brought a hand to her face, shielding her vision. Nathaniel placed a steady arm around her shoulder, protectively, scanning the scene. A cluster of worried maintenance workers and a frantic Tom the security guard stood in the corridor, each stepping forward, arms extended to help them. At last, after too many hours and revelations they'd never planned to share, the elevator's door was propped open enough for them to slip out. Grace, trembling with relief, allowed Tom to clasp her hand and guide her onto solid ground. She looked back to ensure Nathaniel followed close behind. Their eyes meeting in a moment weighted with significance. They were free. But in that fleeting instant, neither realized they were also crossing into a new chapter of their entwined fates. A chorus of voices flooded the corridor the moment Grace's feet touched the hallway floor. The maintenance workers, disheveled and visibly relieved, rushed to check both her and Nathaniel for injuries. Flashlights flickered across the walls, bouncing off shiny tools and sweaty brows. Tom, pale from worry, hoisted Grace into a brief but heartfelt hug before turning to Nathaniel with equal concern. "Thank goodness," Tom muttered, releasing Grace and rubbing a trembling hand across his eyes. "I tried calling the elevator, the speaker wasn't responding. I thought maybe you'd gone home already, but then I saw your bag still in the lounge upstairs. That's when maintenance found the fault in the control board." Grace offered him a shaky smile. "We're okay, Tom. Just very grateful to be out." She felt a wave of dizzy relief and realized belatedly that she was still clutching Nathaniel's hand in hers. Flushing, she let go as he slipped away to talk with one of the building supervisors. The fluorescent hallway light felt both harsh and comforting at once. Hours spent in the flickering gloom of the elevator had sharpened Grace's senses. She blinked, taking in every detail: the greenish hue of the old tile floor, the chipped paint on the walls, the potted plastic plants in the corner. While a second maintenance worker explained the situation, an entire bank of circuits had shorted, causing a ripple effect through the elevator's power grid. Grace tuned out their technical jargon. Her attention drifted to Nathaniel as he spoke quietly with Tom. Even in exhaustion, he maintained a certain calm authority that had everyone deferring to him. His tie was undone now, the crisp vest rumpled. Through her tired eyes, Grace could see the strain etched in his features. But there was also a lightness that hadn't been present before, as though a weight had lifted. She didn't doubt he was relieved. They both were. Her own legs felt rubbery. She leaned against the corridor wall, wishing she could slip away quietly and find a place to breathe. For some reason, adrenaline was still coursing through her veins, preventing her from truly relaxing. This ordeal had left her more rattled than she wanted to admit. A gentle tap on her shoulder made her jump. It was Nathaniel. He nodded toward the end of the hallway, where a row of chairs was set up near the windows. "You look like you could sit for a moment," he said softly. Concern shadowed his gray eyes. Grace nodded wordlessly, letting him guide her. As they moved away from the bustle, she realized they were still on an upper floor, probably near where some of the largest offices were located. The windows showcased a sea of city lights against the night sky. The reflection of their faces hovered in the dark glass, two silhouettes bound by chance. She sank into a plastic chair with a small exhale of relief. Nathaniel sat beside her, loosening the top button of his shirt. The sense of privacy was a welcome balm, even though they could still hear the maintenance crew's muffled chatter and Tom's worried exclamations down the corridor. For a few beats, they said nothing. It was enough just to breathe air that wasn't stale, to let the overhead lights ground them in a reality where they weren't sealed off from the rest of the world. Finally, Grace broke the silence. "So, they said the circuits are old, overloaded. Guess that's not exactly surprising." She tried for a light tone but felt her voice catch with residual nerves. "We were lucky we weren't free-falling." Nathaniel winced slightly at the phrase. "Yes, lucky." He drummed his fingers on the chair's armrest. "Still, I should have ensured a building update. Been meaning to do a full renovation for years, but things got pushed back." His brow furrowed, frustration surfacing. I can't believe it took an incident like this for me to realize how serious the problem was. Grace peered over at him, sympathy blooming. You can't be blamed for every malfunction here. You have a whole company to run, right? It's not like you personally neglected to fix every loose bolt. She managed a small, reassuring smile. No one was hurt. That's what matters. He shifted, letting out a breath. You say that now. But imagine if something worse had happened. He paused, raking a hand through his hair. Listen, Grace, I just wanted to say I'm sorry you ended up stuck because of a building I own. You shouldn't have had to go through that. She blinked, surprised by the humility in his voice. Of all the things she thought she'd hear from him tonight, an apology wasn't on the list. You don't have to apologize. We didn't exactly plan any of it. A small laugh escaped her. Though if you feel indebted to me, I'll accept compensation in the form of a lifetime elevator pass to somewhere safer. Her joke elicited a faint chuckle from him, and for a moment they both let the tension evaporate into muted amusement. The mundane hum of city noises through the windows, the rush of distant traffic, a siren in the far background, felt strangely comforting. It reminded them that life was moving on outside these walls, oblivious to the odd events of their evening. Before either could delve further, Tom shuffled over, a soft worry etched into his features. Miss Sullivan? Mr. Hayes? The maintenance team's clearing out. They said the elevator's offline for the night. They'll run final checks in the morning, but, He cleared his throat, twisting the brim of his worn security cap in his hands. There's a question of how you'll both get down to the lobby. The other elevators might not be reliable either, given the electrical surges. Grace's eyebrows shot up. You mean, we might have to take the stairs? Tom gave a half-apologetic shrug. Afraid so, at least until they test the backup power. We're 24 floors up. I'd escort you, but they need me at the front desk to sign out the maintenance guys. He frowned, glancing at Grace's not-quite-sturdy shoes and exhausted posture. I'm real sorry. A weary sigh passed her lips, but she offered Tom a reassuring nod. Don't worry. I could use the exercise, she joked, though her legs felt like jelly just thinking about all those flights of stairs. Nathaniel stood, extending a hand to help her up. We'll manage. I can walk you down. The way he said it felt quietly resolute, as if he'd already decided he wouldn't let her do this alone. Tom beamed, relief washing over him. If you're sure, Mr. Hayes, I appreciate that. He stepped aside, gesturing toward the emergency stairwell at the far end of the corridor. Take it slow, and please watch your footing. Some of the lights in the stairwell flicker. Grace gathered her bag, feeling the ache in her shoulders. She was in no condition to argue, nor did she want to. The idea of descending 24 flights of steps was daunting enough without worrying about being alone. She turned to Nathaniel with a soft smile of gratitude. Thank you. Really. He just nodded, pressing a hand lightly to the small of her back as they headed in the direction Tom indicated. His touch was a polite guide, but it sent an unexpected warmth through Grace. She inhaled, telling herself she was just keyed up from the ordeal. Still, there was no denying the sense of comfort his presence brought. The stairwell, illuminated by sparse bulbs, smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale air. Each step they took echoed with a metallic clang. Grace's calves burned after just a few flights, a reminder that, for all her hustle in the classroom, her gym routine was non-existent. Yet Nathaniel remained beside her, occasionally offering to hold her bag or slow his pace to match hers. They talked in scattered bursts to distract themselves from the monotony of it. All right, I have to ask, she panted lightly after the 6th floor. Do you ever do anything for fun? Outside of being a corporate mogul, I mean. He let out a bemused huff. Define fun. I golf occasionally for business deals, but that's about it. Grace shook her head, smiling despite her breathlessness. Not the same. I mean something just for you. Travel, painting, music, anything at all. Nathaniel mulled it over, lips quirking. I grew up playing piano, he offered. My mother taught me. After she passed, my father saw no point in continuing. Said it wouldn't help in business. I haven't touched a piano in years. Grace's eyes softened. That's too bad. Maybe you should take it up again someday. Not everything in life has to be about profit and loss, right? He nodded thoughtfully but didn't say more. She sensed a thread of regret beneath his casual tone, and her heart tugged with sympathy. They continued downward, step by step. Her breath came in small gasps now, and she felt a trickle of sweat at her temple. 24 floors, she repeated internally. Who had designed such a tall building? And why didn't she wear better shoes? Around the 10th floor, they took a brief break, leaning against the cool cement wall. Nathaniel pulled a folded handkerchief from his suit jacket pocket, offering it to Grace so she could dab her brow. Don't strain yourself, he warned gently. We can go slower. She accepted the handkerchief with a flush of gratitude. Thanks, I'm just... She chuckled, self-deprecating. Clearly not in triathlon shape. He looked as though he might make a teasing remark, but instead he just offered a respectful half-smile, admiring the perseverance in her eyes. The quiet closeness that sprang between them in that moment was both natural and disarming. Had they met under normal circumstances, would they even have spoken? It was a thought that struck Grace as oddly sad. This connection might never have formed without that broken elevator. I appreciate you walking with me, she said, pausing to gather her breath. Really? You didn't have to. He arched an eyebrow. After what we just went through? Leaving you to tackle these stairs alone would be unthinkable. Besides, his expression softened. I don't mind. They resumed their descent, neither pushing the pace. Outside, the windows lining the stairwell's landings revealed dawn's approach, a faint glow lifting the horizon as the city's electric lights began to fade. The realization that the entire night had slipped away while they were trapped sank in slowly, bringing a surreal quality to their journey. Finally, after an eternity of steps, they reached the bottom level. The door opened onto the main lobby, which was brightly lit now. Security staff were bustling about. Multiple members of the maintenance crew scurried in and out carrying tools. Tom, spotting them, rushed over, relief plain on his face. You both made it, he exclaimed. I've got fresh coffee brewing. You want some? Grace nearly wilted with gratefulness at the thought of coffee, but the swirl of exhaustion and hunger made her hesitate. She wasn't sure if coffee or food or simply collapsing into a bed would help her more. Maybe a sip, she managed. Nathaniel glanced at his phone. Now that they were in the lobby, it had a signal again. Missed calls and messages poured in, no doubt from his team, possibly even business partners wondering where he was all night. He sighed, half dreading the onslaught of responsibilities. Grace watched him out of the corner of her eye. It was as though the real world was rushing back in, threatening to tear away the fleeting bubble of closeness they'd found. Clearing her throat, she gently touched his sleeve. I won't keep you. I'm sure you have a million calls to make. He hesitated, eyes flicking to her. There was something unspoken in his gaze, an odd reluctance to let this moment slip away without acknowledgement. Let me see you get home safely, at least, he said. Then, almost shyly, he amended, if that's okay. A wave of warmth flooded her chest. Sure, she said quietly. I'll just grab my things. She turned to Tom, who handed her a styrofoam cup of coffee and her coat. After exchanging a few words of gratitude, she noticed Nathaniel had taken a step aside, making a phone call. Even from a distance, she caught the strain in his posture, the flurry of, yes, I'm fine, no, I was stuck in... She couldn't hear the rest, but it was enough to remind her he was an important man in high demand. When he hung up, the lines on his face deepened with fatigue. Yet the moment he saw her, those lines softened. Shall we? He asked simply, extending his arm. She nodded, letting him escort her out the front doors. The morning sun peeked through the tall city buildings, bathing the street in a gentle gold. Grace inhaled fresh air, feeling as if she were waking from a strange, surreal dream. But her body ached, testifying that the night's events had been all too real. They paused at the curb where a few cabs idled. Nathaniel slid his phone into his pocket. "Where do you live? I can drop you off or pay for your cab, whichever you prefer." She opened her mouth to protest, her independent streak flaring, but she was too exhausted to argue, and part of her didn't want to refuse the generosity. "I'm in the Harrington district," she said at last. "It's not too far." He signaled a taxi, holding the door open for her. She sank into the back seat, clutching her coffee cup. Nathaniel eased in beside her, the seatbelt clicking. With a curt nod to the driver, he stated the address Grace provided. As the cab pulled away from the curb, she let out a breath and leaned her head back, eyelids heavy. He watched her for a beat before silently turning to gaze out the window. Neither spoke much during the ride. The city was stirring, early commuters hurrying along sidewalks, bakeries opening their doors. Each scene whipped by as the taxi maneuvered through traffic. As they approached Harrington District, Grace gathered the mental energy to say what she needed to say. "I can't thank you enough," she began, voice earnest. "For everything, really. Being stuck with a stranger could have been awful, but you made it bearable." Nathaniel met her eyes, and the corners of his lips curved gently. "You did the same for me. More than you know." The driver pulled up to Grace's building, a modest brick complex with peeling paint around the doorway. She handed over a few bills for the fare, but Nathaniel insisted on paying. Too exhausted to put up more than a token protest, she let him. Then, unsure of the protocol, did they shake hands, hug, simply wave goodbye? She gave him a hesitant smile. "I guess this is it." He slid out of the car, stepping around to help her gather her things. A flutter of uncertainty rippled through her stomach. She realized she might never see him again, and something in that realization felt unexpectedly painful. "Take care," she managed, her voice wavering slightly. He paused, searching her face. "You too, Grace." Then, as if making a last-minute decision, he drew a small card from his wallet and pressed it into her hand. "If you need anything, please don't hesitate." She glanced at the card. Nathaniel Hayes, a direct phone number scrawled in pen beneath the company logo. Her heart thudded. "Thank you," she murmured. He inclined his head in a silent goodbye, then slipped back into the taxi. She stood at the curb, watching the vehicle merge into traffic until it disappeared around the corner. Only when her limbs began to shake from weariness did she turn and climb the short flight of steps to her apartment. Inside, she locked the door, set down her bag, and sank onto the couch in a haze. As the adrenaline ebbed, her mind whirled, replaying each moment in that elevator. The flicker of the emergency bulb, the short breaths of panic, the gentle reassurance of Nathaniel's voice. She gazed down at the card he'd given her, running her fingers over the letters. Her mind drifted to a future she couldn't yet picture. She barely knew him, but something had shifted inside her, forging an invisible thread of connection. Yawning, she let her eyes close, exhaustion winning out at last. A thought rose unbidden before she sank into sleep. Sometimes, extraordinary bonds form in the quiet of unexpected moments, and sometimes those moments carry far more weight than anyone expects. The first few days following that surreal night in the elevator felt like a blur to Grace. She'd slept for nearly 12 straight hours after stumbling home, only waking to the insistent chime of her alarm, blaring that she was already late for work. When she finally peeled her eyes open, her muscles groaned in protest, reminding her of the 24 flights of stairs she'd trudged down with Nathaniel by her side. Stifling a yawn, she hurried to wash up and throw on a fresh outfit. Her mind buzzed with images from the previous night, the cramped elevator, the flickering emergency light, the subdued strength in Nathaniel's eyes. Their entire encounter seemed almost dreamlike. If not for the business card still tucked safely in her wallet, she might have believed she'd imagined it. She arrived at her classroom just as her seventh graders started bustling in. Books slammed, chairs scraped, and the usual pre-lesson chatter filled the air. With her teacher's reflexes kicking in, Grace managed to settle them enough to begin. Yet all throughout roll call, her thoughts drifted to a certain tall figure in a disheveled suit offering her half of an energy bar. She found herself glancing at the clock more than usual, and at one point she had to forcibly shake off her reverie when a student asked for help with a math problem. By lunchtime, the sleepless haze made her head pound. She sank into the worn plastic chair in the teacher's lounge, cradling a paper cup of coffee. A colleague, Rachel Green, an English teacher with kind, inquisitive eyes, slid into the seat across from her. "You look like you barely slept," Rachel said gently. "Everything okay?" Grace hesitated. She wasn't sure how to explain the bizarre night without sounding dramatic. She offered a half smile. "Got stuck in a broken elevator for hours. Finally got out at dawn." Rachel's jaw dropped. "What? Are you serious?" Grace gave a brief summary, skimming over the details of her companion. She felt a curious urge to protect that part of the story, as if speaking Nathaniel's name out loud would break the spell. Rachel listened, eyes wide, then reached over to squeeze Grace's arm. "That's terrifying. I'm so glad you're all right." She paused, a pensive gleam in her expression. "Wait, where exactly did this happen? You said some old tower?" "It's called the Wellsburg Corporate Center," Grace answered. "One of those older downtown buildings. My friend's mother was cleaning offices there, so we used a conference room to tutor. Didn't realize how outdated the place was." Rachel nodded slowly, rummaging in her lunch sack. "That's the building rumored to be owned by Hayes something, right?" Grace's cheeks warmed. "Yes," she murmured, taking a sip of coffee. "Hayes Tech. Didn't know that until I was literally stuck with the man who owns it." Rachel froze mid-bite. "Wait, you were stuck with the owner? That's some twist of fate. Did he act all arrogant, or was he apologetic?" A swirl of memories flashed in Grace's mind. Nathaniel's quiet remorse, his protective hand guiding her through the corridor, the sincerity in his eyes. "He wasn't arrogant at all," she said softly. "He was kind. Unexpectedly so." Rachel leaned forward, intrigued. But Grace changed the subject, not ready to share more. She still felt raw with the magnitude of that night. The rest of the day blurred by, though she caught herself glancing at her phone, half hoping it might light up with an unknown number. It never did. Meanwhile, across the city, Nathaniel Hayes stood in the sleek office suite of his primary headquarters. An ultra-modern skyscraper that contrasted starkly with the aging Wellsburg building. Tall windows offered panoramic views of steel and glass, but to him, they felt less impressive than usual. There was an itch at the back of his mind, an awareness of something unfinished. He sat behind a glass-topped desk, only half listening while his assistant rattled off a list of upcoming meetings. His phone, usually a relentless source of demands and alerts, lay face down on the desk. He couldn't stop his thoughts from wandering back to Grace, the steady calm she displayed when fear gripped them, her gentle humor despite their predicament. She'd made a lasting impression, which both intrigued and unnerved him. He was used to forging alliances in the corporate world, relationships built on strategy, negotiation, or mutual profit, but with Grace, everything had been raw and unplanned. She wasn't someone who wanted anything from him, except maybe not to die in a broken elevator. He couldn't recall the last time he felt so seen in a simple human way. Fingers drumming on the desk, Nathaniel found himself remembering the scribbled phone number he'd penned on the back of his business card. He'd given it to her in a moment of impulse, wanting her to have a direct line if she ever needed help. But would she really call? Did she even want him to? His assistant, Brian, finished reading the schedule and tilted his head. "Sir, is everything all right? You've been a bit distracted since you came in this morning." Nathaniel forced a tight smile, clearing his throat. It's nothing. A rough night. The elevator fiasco. He paused, eyes flicking to the dark phone. Tell me something, Brian. If someone gave you their number, would you call them out of the blue if you weren't sure they wanted to hear from you? Brian's brow furrowed. He was used to logistical queries, budgets, timelines, but personal advice. This was new. Well, sir, that depends. Is it a professional contact or a personal one? Nathaniel hesitated. I'm not entirely certain. He waved a hand. Never mind. Let's proceed with the day. We have that acquisition briefing at 2 p.m., correct? Brian nodded, though he eyed Nathaniel with mild curiosity before leaving the office. Alone again, Nathaniel stared at his phone for a solid minute, wrestling with indecision. Should he call or text, just to check if she was okay? After all, they both survived a frightening experience. Politeness dictated a courtesy follow-up. Yet something deeper stirred. What if hearing her voice again made him realize how much he missed it? Pushing aside the swirl of thoughts, he turned to his computer. Work first. Always. That night, Grace trudged back to her cramped apartment. She set her bag by the door and sank onto the couch, massaging her temples. It was barely 8, but she felt bone-tired. She tried scanning a few math assignments she'd brought home, but the words blurred. Eventually, she closed the folder and allowed her gaze to drift toward the small coffee table, where she'd placed the slip of paper with Nathaniel's number. Her heart fluttered. She'd been through so many ups and downs in life, forging her own path. Reaching out to him felt both exhilarating and terrifying. What if he was busy, or what if he'd been polite in the elevator but wanted no real connection? Trying to reason away her jitters, she reminded herself they hardly knew each other. Yet the memory of those quiet, intense hours together lingered like a melody she couldn't shake. She knew better than to expect some sweeping fairy tale, but it felt wrong to let the moment vanish into nothing. Maybe a text, just to thank him properly, see if the building got fixed, something casual. Resolving to be brave, she grabbed her phone. For several agonizing minutes, she drafted a simple text. Hi, it's Grace. Just wanted to say thanks again for helping me get home safely. Hope all is well. She read it over, her nerves screaming. Before she could overthink further, she hit send. Then she promptly tossed her phone onto the cushions, heart hammering as though she'd leapt off a cliff. Minutes crawled by like hours. She busied herself heating leftover soup for dinner, checking the mail, watering the drooping fern by her window. Still no vibration or chime. Disappointment threatened to seep in. Maybe he was out, or maybe he'd changed his mind about wanting to stay in touch. By the time she finished her soup, there was still nothing. She sighed, setting the empty bowl in the sink. A mild headache pulsed at her temples. She was about to drag herself to the shower when her phone buzzed. Nearly dropping it in her haste, she saw an unknown number on the screen. Her pulse leaped. Hey, Grace, read the text. I'm glad you reached out. Thank you for the message. I hope you've recovered from all that excitement. Her cheeks warmed. The few lines of text felt unexpectedly personal. She sank onto the couch, typing a reply with trembling fingers. Recovered, yes, but still pretty sore from all those stairs. How about you? Within seconds, another reply arrived. Same here. My calves have never forgiven me. Long day at work, but I kept thinking about how surreal everything was. You doing okay otherwise? Grace felt her tension dissolve into a soft smile. She typed back, more eagerly this time. Yeah, just needed some sleep and normalcy. I told my coworkers about the ordeal. They were horrified. Not every day you get trapped with a CEO. A brief pause, then. Not every day a CEO is lucky enough to be trapped with someone like you either. Her heart fluttered. She stared at that line, reading it twice. The words were simple but laden with an unspoken warmth that stirred an unfamiliar longing in her chest. She swallowed, reminding herself this was just a text conversation. She shouldn't read too much into it. Still, a shy grin spread across her face as she typed, Glad it wasn't a total nightmare on your end. A few blinking dots, then. Far from it. I was wondering, would you like to meet for coffee sometime? Maybe talk without the threat of plummeting a dozen floors? Grace's heart pounded so hard she worried she might pass out. She read the message 3 times, each one sending a fresh jolt of electricity through her veins. After everything she'd been through, caution urged her to be practical. Yet her intuition, a quiet voice that had guided her through foster homes and heartbreak, whispered that sometimes taking a leap was the right move. She typed back, hands trembling. That sounds nice. I'd like that. The next message came quickly. Great. I know a place downtown, Maple and Pine Coffee Shop. How about tomorrow evening if you're free? Grace glanced at her schedule. She had a staff meeting that might run late, but the thought of seeing him again pushed her doubts aside. Tomorrow works. Let's say 7 p.m.? Perfect. See you then, he confirmed. Staring at the screen, Grace let out a shaky laugh that bordered on giddy. A swirl of hope and nervous excitement filled her chest. She was meeting Nathaniel Hayes again, not as 2 desperate souls sharing an elevator crisis, but by choice. The mere thought sent goosebumps skittering across her arms. Setting the phone aside, she leaned her head against the couch cushions, closing her eyes. In the back of her mind, a few insecurities flared. What if they were too different? What if this was just a curiosity for him and she got hurt in the end? But she tried to quiet those doubts. Life seldom offered second chances so directly. Maybe, for once, she should trust the possibility that something good was on the horizon. And beyond that horizon, unseen to them both, fate was weaving threads that stretched further than a single coffee date. Because what had happened in that elevator was more than a chance encounter. It was the seed of a future neither of them could have predicted, one that would bind them in ways neither yet imagined. By the time Thursday evening rolled around, Grace was more nervous than she cared to admit. She sat at her desk in an otherwise empty classroom, eyes flicking to the clock every few minutes. Staff meetings had run longer than usual. Budget concerns, new curriculum guidelines, the usual red tape. She took notes absently, all the while conscious of the tight knot of anticipation in her stomach. She'd told Rachel, her colleague, that she had plans after work which earned her a teasing look. But Grace offered no details. The truth was, she still felt a bit bashful about the whole situation. After all, it wasn't every day that one grabbed coffee with a CEO who was, until recently, an absolute stranger in a broken elevator. Finally, at 6:30 p.m., she locked up her classroom and rushed to her car. The sky wore a deepening shade of twilight by the time she navigated the busy streets toward downtown. Maple and Pine Coffee Shop was nestled between 2 towering office buildings, its cozy exterior wrapped in string lights. The soft glow cut through the evening gloom, inviting her in. Walking in, Grace inhaled the comforting aroma of espresso and freshly baked pastries. Small round tables dotted the space, and she spotted Nathaniel at one near the window. He rose the moment he saw her, offering a gentle smile that made her heart flutter. He wore a more casual outfit than she'd expected. A fitted sweater, dark slacks, no tie in sight. It was a look that suited him, surprisingly understated for a man of such public stature. "You made it," he said quietly, stepping forward. The warmth in his eyes was unmistakable. "Long day?" She nodded, breath catching in her throat at how natural it felt to see him again. "Very. You?" A wry twitch of his lips. "The usual, meetings that never end. But I've been looking forward to this." He gestured to the seat across from his. "I got us a small table by the window. Hope that's okay." Grace sank into the chair, setting her purse on the floor. A flush of nervous excitement made her hands clammy. "It's perfect," she murmured, noting the gentle glow of streetlights outside. "I can't believe it's only been a few days since the elevator incident. Feels like I've been living in a different universe." A soft laugh escaped him. "I know the feeling." He waved the barista over and waited while Grace ordered a latte. He opted for a plain black coffee. Once the barista stepped away, he leaned across the table. "I'm glad you texted me, Grace. I wasn't sure you would." She studied the steam swirling from his cup. "I wasn't sure either," she admitted. "But it felt wrong not to reach out. We went through something intense together." Nathaniel's gaze flicked toward the window, where traffic rolled by in waves of headlights. "I've been thinking a lot about that night. About you," he said quietly. "It's strange how an unwanted situation can lead to unexpected connections." She felt her cheeks warm. "Agreed," she replied, somewhat shy. "Honestly, I haven't been able to stop replaying it in my head. The fear, the relief, everything." Their drinks arrived, offering a brief moment of distraction. Grace wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic mug, inhaling the comforting scent. They sipped in silence for a stretch, each measuring how best to navigate this new ground that was at once familiar and unfamiliar. Finally, she ventured, "I hope your building is getting the repairs it needs. Are the elevators still out of commission?" He set his coffee down, expression taut. "I put a team on it immediately. We're modernizing the entire elevator system and fixing a laundry list of other issues. Turns out the place was in worse shape than I realized. A few staffers joked that it took me getting stuck to finally act." Grace smiled wryly. "Well, at least good will come of it. No one else should have to deal with such a scare." He nodded, gaze steady on her face. "I owe you, you know. If I hadn't ended up in that elevator with you, I might have let things languish longer." There was a candid note to his voice that made her heart stir. "Sometimes I get so buried in deals and expansions I forget about basic human details, like the safety of the people who actually use my buildings." She shook her head gently. "You don't owe me anything, but I'm glad you're making changes. That's more than some would do." Another lull in conversation settled in, but this one felt companionable. The clink of utensils and soft chatter from other patrons surrounded them, forming a cocoon of cozy background noise. Grace glanced around. The coffee shop was a mix of college students typing furiously on laptops and friends catching up over pastries. In the corner, a live acoustic guitarist softly played a folk tune. Nathaniel cleared his throat. "Mind if I ask about your students? You mentioned you teach math?" Grace's face lit up. Teaching was her favorite topic. "Yes, 7th grade math, though I also end up tutoring English sometimes. Middle schoolers are an adventure. They're old enough to have opinions, but young enough to still need guidance. It can be challenging, but there's nothing like seeing the light bulb go on when a concept finally clicks." He watched her animated expression with clear fascination. "I envy that kind of passion. Must be rewarding, influencing young minds." She sipped her latte, the foam leaving a faint mustache she quickly dabbed away. "It is, but it's underfunded and underpaid, and I see kids who fall through the cracks every day. I can only do so much. Still, I try to give them hope." Nathaniel's eyes softened with respect. "You're doing something real, something that changes lives in a direct way. I admire that." A self-deprecating note crept into his voice. "I worry that everything I do only matters on spreadsheets." Grace set her mug down, leaning forward. "I get it, though. You're building things, creating jobs. Even if it's not always tangible in the same way teaching is. But maybe there's room for you to do more if that's what you want." He glanced away, pensive. "Maybe. My father never had time for philanthropy unless it gave him a tax break or PR benefit. I learned from him, but not always the right lessons." He paused, looking at Grace anew. "I'm not sure why I'm telling you all this. You must think I'm some spoiled millionaire having a crisis of conscience." She reached out, grazing his wrist in a reassuring touch. "You're allowed to have doubts, no matter your background. Nobody's life is perfect." A current of warmth passed through them at the contact. Nathaniel turned his palm upward beneath hers, A slight motion that felt like an invitation. Heart pounding, Grace let her fingertips brush his hand. The softness of that moment caused the din of the coffee shop to fade as though they were in a private world of shared vulnerability. When she pulled back, a tinge of color stained her cheeks. "So," she ventured, "if not business, if not expansions, what else do you like? You mentioned piano once?" He blinked, remembering that offhand confession. "I did. I haven't played in years." Nostalgia flickered across his features. "Mom taught me. I was never great, but it gave me peace. Sometimes I wonder if I should have kept at it." "Maybe it's not too late," Grace encouraged. "We're never too old to rediscover something that makes us happy." He studied her face, grateful for the genuine interest. "What about you? Any hidden hobbies?" She shrugged with a shy smile. "Reading, mostly. I love classic literature, and I bake on weekends sometimes. Cupcakes for my students' birthdays. Nothing special." "Baking is definitely special. Cupcakes are serious business," he teased, and she laughed softly. Their eyes locked, a small shared moment of delight. After that, the conversation meandered, covering everything from childhood anecdotes to favorite movies. Each question and answer peeled back another layer of guardedness. Grace found herself genuinely relaxing, forgetting that she was sitting across from an extremely powerful figure. Nathaniel, for his part, allowed himself to smile more freely than he had in months. Eventually, the live acoustic guitarist took a short break, and the coffee shop's chatter regained prominence. Grace glanced at her phone. Over an hour had slipped by, yet it felt like mere minutes. Her heart sank at the thought of the night ending. Nathaniel noticed her subtle glance and checked his watch. "I hate to cut this short," he said regretfully, "but I have a conference call with Tokyo at 9. Time zone differences, you know." Her spirits dipped, though she managed to smile. "Of course, I understand." He hesitated, as if weighing a decision. Then he spoke, voice low. "I've enjoyed tonight more than I expected. I'd like to see you again, if you'd be okay with that." Her pulse fluttered. She sipped her latte to hide her grin. "I'd like that too." They stood, gathering their coats and cups. At the door, the cool evening air embraced them in a gentle breeze. The city lights glittered across the pavement. Standing close, Grace and Nathaniel faced one another, neither wanting to break the spell. "So," he said, glancing at her with a faint, crooked smile, "do I walk you to your car this time, or do we risk any staircases?" The playful glimmer in his eyes made her laugh. "Definitely safer to stay on solid ground, I think," she answered. "My car's just around the corner." He followed her, hands in his pockets, shoulders relaxed. The foot traffic around them ebbed and flowed with people heading to bars or finishing late shifts. Under a street lamp, they paused by her modest hatchback. Grace fiddled with her keys. "Thank you for tonight," she said softly. "I didn't realize how much I needed just this. A real conversation, not about the elevator necessarily, but about life." Nathaniel's expression gentled. "Me too," he admitted. He hesitated, then reached out, tucking a stray piece of hair behind her ear. A gesture so intimate it made her breath catch. "We'll do it again soon, if that's all right." She nodded, a lump forming in her throat. In the hush of the moment, she almost thought he might lean in for a kiss. But a passing taxi honked, startling them apart. She let out a shaky laugh, stepping back and unlocking her car. Yes. Soon," she echoed. He nodded, stepping away so she could climb in. Before shutting the door, he bent slightly, voice soft. "Drive safe, Grace." And with that, the door closed. Heart pounding, she started the engine and rolled down the window. "Good night, Nathaniel," she managed, meeting his gaze one last time. The sight of him standing on the curb, hands in his pockets, eyes watching her depart, stuck with her all the way home. By the time she parked in front of her apartment, she realized she'd been wearing a broad, foolish smile. She whispered a silent thanks to fate, to the broken elevator, to the sheer improbability of it all. All she knew for sure was that something in her life had shifted, ignited. She just prayed she wasn't letting her hopes run ahead of reality. Because for a woman who'd spent her life guarding her heart, the possibility of heartbreak was always there. Yet a larger part of her believed in a way she never had before that maybe, just maybe, she'd found someone who could understand her truths. For several weeks, Grace and Nathaniel navigated a cautious but growing closeness. Their evenings became sprinkled with late-night texts and brief phone calls. Sometimes they would meet at the same coffee shop, Maple and Pine, chatting over pastries for an hour or two whenever their schedules allowed. Other times they walked through the downtown park, discussing everything from music to childhood stories while the lamp-lit paths guided them through the chill air. As days turned into a couple of months, the initial awkwardness of their vastly different worlds found a gentle rhythm. Grace stayed immersed in her teaching, a constant swirl of lesson plans, grading, and occasional tutoring sessions. Nathaniel, on the other hand, maintained his relentless corporate responsibilities, business expansions, investor calls, and brand negotiations. Even so, they carved out tiny pockets of time to see each other, exchanging glimpses of their otherwise separate lives. Grace often teased him that he worked too hard. "So you conquered the elevator fiasco. When are you going to conquer letting yourself take a break?" she'd quip. Nathaniel, half smiling, would promise, "Soon," while glancing at the stack of documents in his briefcase. In truth, she suspected old habits ran deep, but at least he seemed willing to reevaluate how he spent his days. She took it as a hopeful sign. Likewise, Nathaniel observed Grace with mounting admiration and respect. Here was a woman who practically lived on a teacher's salary, yet gave so generously to her students. Time, energy, even small gifts from her own tight budget. He admired her resilience, her sense of purpose, and each time they sat at a cramped cafe table, he found himself wanting to know more about her, the hidden chapters of her past she rarely spoke of. One crisp Saturday morning, as autumn leaves drifted across the city sidewalks, Nathaniel suggested a visit to the newly renovated Wellsburg Corporate Center. "We've finished the major elevator upgrades," he told Grace, a self-conscious twitch at the corner of his lips. "You might like to see that the place is no longer a death trap." Grace laughed. "I'd be curious, yes, but you're sure you want to step foot back in those elevators with me?" He gave a theatrical grimace. "I think we'll survive." That Saturday, Grace found herself in the building's refurbished lobby. Sunlight streamed through high windows, illuminating the newly polished marble floors. The old reception desk had been replaced with a sleek, modern counter. A couple of smiling security guards nodded politely as Nathaniel guided her toward the elevator bank. She couldn't help a small shiver of memory when she saw the numbered metal doors. He pressed the call button, and within seconds, a modernized elevator whirred into place. The doors slid open to reveal an interior lined with brushed steel and fresh lighting. Grace eyed it warily. "It looks so different," she murmured, stepping inside. Nathaniel joined her, hitting the button for the upper floor. As the doors closed, she felt a momentary drop in her stomach, the echo of that night's terror. But this time, the elevator hummed smoothly upward, no flicker of lights or grinding stops. They ascended without so much as a tremor. When they reached the 24th floor, a space that once felt cold and desolate, they emerged to see bright corridors and new carpeting underfoot. The offices were still largely empty, pending future tenants, but the entire atmosphere was changed. Glass-paneled walls let in natural light, and some potted plants lined the hallway. Grace wandered past the vacant offices, imagining what it must have been like before the renovation. "I can't believe this is the same place," she said, glancing over her shoulder at Nathaniel. "It's like you breathed new life into it." He shrugged, a bit bashful. It was overdue. Turns out there was a lot more here than just failing wiring. There were hazards left and right. We updated fire codes, rewired power lines, redesigned the lobby. Next is finding good tenants who will respect the building's history. She paused by a window, gazing out at the city skyline. Something about the newly polished view made her think of how, in life, old wounds or neglected corners might be renewed with the right care. She turned to face him, sunlight catching motes of dust in the air. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. "I don't know if that's strange to say, but seeing this change, it's a big deal." Nathaniel's eyes warmed. "Thank you," he replied, stepping closer. "Your opinion matters a lot to me." A fleeting pause. "Maybe more than I expected." Heat rose to her cheeks at the quiet confession. "I'm glad," she whispered, pressing her lips together to contain a smile. In moments like this, it felt almost unreal that they'd once been strangers. But the elevator, it seemed, had sparked a series of transformations. In the building, in Nathaniel's business approach, and possibly in both of their hearts. They strolled to a vacant conference room, windows spanning an entire wall. Nathaniel pushed the door open with a soft click and motioned for her to enter. Afternoon sunshine glowed across a large table polished to a mirror sheen, chairs neatly arranged. A sense of possibility hung in the quiet air. Grace wandered over to the table's edge, resting her fingertips on it. "So you'll lease these offices out?" He joined her, nodding. "Yes, or I might keep a floor or two for Hayes Tech expansions. But mostly I want to bring in smaller businesses, startups, nonprofits maybe. I've been thinking about a mentorship program that would sponsor emerging entrepreneurs." His voice brimmed with a fresh enthusiasm. Surprise flickered across her face. "That sounds incredible. Are you sure your board would approve?" A wry smile curved his lips. "The board answers to me more than I answer to them. But I've learned to build consensus. If I present it as an opportunity for good PR and future growth, they'll come around." Then, more earnestly, he added, "But honestly, it feels right. Giving back. You inspired some of that, you know, seeing how you invest in your students with so little in return." Grace felt a rush of warmth, and her chest swelled with emotion. She reached for his hand, giving a gentle squeeze. "I just do what I can. If you can do something bigger, that's wonderful." His grip tightened fractionally, as though he drew strength from her encouragement. Eyes locked on hers, he thought about leaning closer, about giving voice to the feelings that had slowly blossomed in the weeks they'd spent talking, laughing, learning each other's quirks. But an unexpected rattling from the corridor interrupted the moment. Nathaniel let go of her hand, stepping back with a half-smile. "Guess we'd better check who's milling around. Don't want rumors flying that the new building owner is slacking off." She laughed, following him out into the hallway. The sense of something unspoken lingered, but she didn't push. The day wasn't over yet. They took the elevator back down. This time the ride was so smooth it was barely noticeable, and Nathaniel led her to the lobby. As they walked, he pointed out details: new lighting fixtures, decorative plants, a mural in progress that paid homage to the building's original 1930s architecture. Grace listened intently, genuinely proud of all he'd done. When they finally stepped outside, the crisp autumn air greeted them. Grace zipped up her jacket, glancing at the midday sunlight reflecting off nearby skyscrapers. "Thanks for showing me around," she said. "It's amazing what you've accomplished." Nathaniel tucked his hands into his coat pockets, looking momentarily unsure of himself. "I'm glad you came," he replied softly. "And, would you have time for lunch? I was thinking we could—" Before he could finish, a familiar voice called out, "Mr. Hayes! Mr. Hayes! I have those documents!" A sharp-eyed woman in a tailored suit hurried toward them, a stack of folders clutched in her arms. She halted upon seeing Grace, blinking in surprise. Nathaniel, face sliding into businesslike neutrality, stepped forward. "Ah, Ms. Davison," he greeted, taking the folders. "I forgot you'd be dropping these by." He introduced Grace with a polite smile. "Ms. Sullivan, my friend." She's been touring the updated offices with me. Ms. Davison flashed a professional smile but couldn't hide the curiosity in her eyes. "Nice to meet you," she said curtly, handing over the papers. Then, turning to Nathaniel, she added, "The investor meeting was rescheduled for this afternoon, so we'll need your signature on these forms. And there's a call awaiting your confirmation for next week." Nathaniel's jaw tightened fractionally. "Understood. I'll look them over shortly." As Ms. Davison retreated, he exhaled. "Well, that's my cue. Business never sleeps, apparently." Grace tried to hide her disappointment. "Right, of course. We can do lunch another time." Nathaniel nodded, gaze flicking between the folders and her face. "I'm sorry," he murmured, almost pained. "Sometimes this life just won't let me breathe." A sympathetic smile tugged at Grace's lips. "I get it. Go do what you have to do. I'll be fine." He studied her for a moment, as if memorizing her expression. Then, stepping closer, he lowered his voice. "I'll call you later. I promise." With a gentle squeeze of her arm, he offered a last, lingering look before turning to follow Ms. Davison back into the building. Grace lingered on the sidewalk, watching him disappear into the glass doors. A swirl of conflicting emotions churned inside her: admiration for all he'd accomplished, a twinge of loneliness that he kept getting pulled into demands and obligations, a glimmer of joy that he'd included her in this new project. Eventually, she walked to her car, mind buzzing. As she started the engine, her phone buzzed too, a message from Rachel asking if Grace wanted to join the faculty team for happy hour. She typed a quick reply that she was busy today, mentally noting the swirl of lesson plans she still had to finish for the coming week. Yet she couldn't quite focus on teacher life, not when her heart was still caught up in the memory of Nathaniel's hand in hers on that empty conference room floor. Driving home, she caught her reflection in the rearview mirror, a small, hopeful smile turning up the corners of her mouth. She reminded herself that life didn't always move at the pace she wanted, but if she'd learned anything from her younger years, from the elevator, from forging her own path, it was that real connections had a way of unfolding if both parties kept choosing to nurture them. In that moment, she decided she would not let fear or impatience derail what was growing between her and Nathaniel. Despite the differences in their worlds, they were both discovering a new facet of themselves, one that yearned for an authentic bond. Maybe this was just the start of a longer journey. Still, she had no way of knowing the surprises fate had yet to reveal, how the invisible lines of destiny were weaving closer than she realized, or that in a matter of weeks, her entire understanding of life and responsibility would shift once again, reuniting them not merely by choice, but by the inexorable force of something far stronger than happenstance. The onset of winter brought the season's usual bustle, holiday decorations in store windows, a crisp bite in the air, and for Grace, a flurry of end-of-semester tests. Her seventh graders alternated between restless excitement for the holidays and anxious tension over upcoming exams. She spent hours after school hosting study sessions, grading stacks of worksheets, and inevitably falling asleep over her laptop more nights than she cared to admit. It wasn't until early December that she noticed she'd been more tired than usual, not just end-of-term exhaustion, but something heavier. At first, she brushed it off. She was juggling her usual class load plus extra tutoring, and she was meeting Nathaniel whenever their schedules allowed. Maybe she was just stretched too thin. But the feeling persisted. She found herself dozing off on weekends, skipping lunch because her stomach churned with mild nausea. Nathaniel, busy with a crucial round of investor pitches, hadn't seen her as frequently these last 2 weeks. But during a rare evening call, he caught the fatigue in her voice. "Are you sleeping okay?" he asked gently. "You sound drained." Grace forced a laugh. "Teacher life, right? It's the season of final tests and unruly kids hopped up on holiday candy. She paused, briefly debating whether to mention the dizziness she'd felt that afternoon. Deciding not to worry him, she changed the subject. "How's the new mentorship program going?" He let her deflection stand, detailing how he'd recruited a handful of aspiring entrepreneurs to occupy part of Wellsburg's newly refurbished space. Through the phone, Grace heard that familiar spark of enthusiasm, a sign that in a whirlwind of corporate responsibilities, Nathaniel had found something meaningful. She smiled to herself. Even if she felt lousy, at least he was thriving. A week later, standing in front of her class, she realized she couldn't chalk up her symptoms to stress anymore. Mid-lesson, the words on the chalkboard seemed to blur. Her stomach lurched as a sudden wave of dizziness overtook her. She clutched the edge of the desk, heart pounding. One of her students, Annie, immediately raised a hand. "Miss Sullivan, are you okay?" Grace pressed a palm to her forehead. I'm fine," she managed, but her voice wavered. Trying to regain composure, she took a breath and forced a reassuring smile. "Just a little lightheaded. Let's get back to—" But the swirl of color behind her eyes wouldn't abate. Minutes after the bell rang, Rachel Green, the English teacher who shared the adjacent classroom, rushed in. She took one look at Grace's pale complexion and insisted on driving her to urgent care. Too weary to argue, Grace let herself be shepherded to Rachel's car, her mind too clouded by that persistent queasiness to protest. At the clinic, she expected the typical rundown: dehydration, maybe anemia or just exhaustion. But after a short evaluation and blood work, the doctor returned with a gentle smile and news that stunned Grace to the core. "Congratulations," the doctor said softly. "You're pregnant." She sat there, heart thumping, ears ringing as the word reverberated in her mind. Pregnant. A litany of thoughts fired off in rapid succession. Confusion, fear, a curious flicker of joy, then near panic. She wasn't married, wasn't even in a serious relationship. Well, she was seeing Nathaniel, but it was all so new, so unexpected. She stared at the doctor, who placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll run a few more checks," the doctor continued, "but from these results I'm confident. You're likely around 6 or 7 weeks along." Grace nodded mutely. Inside her chest, a knot formed, twisting tighter with each passing second. 6 or 7 weeks? That timeline unmistakably lined up with the night she and Nathaniel had spent together, an evening of unplanned closeness after a particularly emotional date. They'd had no illusions about the depth of their connection yet, but passion had caught them off guard, forging a bond neither had planned. She left the clinic feeling both numb and hyper-aware. Rachel, waiting in the lobby, gave her a worried look. "Everything okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Grace forced a shaky smile, unsure if she was ready to confide in her colleague. "I'm fine. The doctor said it's nothing serious. Just need rest." She couldn't bring herself to say the word yet, not to anyone else. Nodding at the staff behind the desk, she let Rachel drive her home in tense silence. That night, after pacing her living room floor for hours, she fished out her phone. Her fingers hovered over Nathaniel's number. Confession warred with fear. Would he be upset? Would he feel trapped? She tried to quell those anxieties by reminding herself of the man she'd grown to know, kind-hearted, earnest beneath his reserved exterior. But a lifetime of self-reliance also whispered that she shouldn't lean on anyone. She ended up texting him something vague. "We need to talk soon. Let me know when you're free." Then she went to bed, though sleep remained elusive. Days slid by without an immediate window in Nathaniel's schedule. A major investor was visiting from overseas, commanding every spare minute. Grace, meanwhile, juggled the secret that now colored all her thoughts. She taught her classes by day, gently pressing a protective hand over her abdomen whenever nausea flared. Late at night, she curled up in bed with her phone, rereading Nathaniel's last messages and drafting, then deleting, a dozen different ways to break the news. Finally, On a Friday afternoon, he called. She was grading papers at her desk, eyes blurry, mind scattered. The phone buzzed, showing his name, and her pulse skyrocketed. "Hey," came his warm baritone, laced with fatigue. "God, I've missed you. Sorry about being MIA. It's been chaos." She swallowed, forcing an even tone. "It's okay. How did everything go?" A heavy exhale. "Fine, I guess. We locked down more funding for the mentorship program. I wanted to see you in person, but we keep missing each other." A pause. "You sounded serious in your message. Is something wrong?" Grace closed her eyes, letting her breath steady. "I'm okay. Mostly. Just a lot has happened. Can we meet tonight? My place, maybe? I'd rather not be out." He agreed without hesitation. "Absolutely. Send me your address." She did. All afternoon, a swirl of nerves churned in her stomach, overshadowing even her lingering nausea. By the time she got home, she'd cleaned the apartment twice over. She tried to eat a light snack, but her throat felt too tight. Around 7 p.m., a crisp knock sounded at her door. There he stood, Nathaniel Hayes, coat draped over one arm, tie loosened. The moment their eyes met, a rush of emotion filled the cramped space. He stepped inside, glancing around the modest living room. No words needed to be exchanged yet. She could see in his expression that he sensed her tension. "Grace," he said softly, setting his coat aside. His hands found hers, warm fingers curling around. "What's going on?" She gestured for him to sit on the small couch. Heart drumming, she sank down beside him. For a moment she couldn't speak. He reached out, brushing her hair back in a gesture reminiscent of the coffee shop weeks ago. That tenderness almost unraveled her. "I'm pregnant," she finally whispered, gaze skittering to the floor. "And it's yours." The silence that followed was almost deafening. She didn't dare look at him. Her heart hammered so loudly it nearly drowned out her thoughts. Seconds stretched like hours before his voice came, soft but certain. "Mine," he repeated, as if testing the word. Gently he tilted her chin up so their eyes met. "You're sure?" She nodded, eyes misting. "The doctor said I'm around 7 weeks. That lines up with that night we—" His expression flickered with a dozen emotions at once. Shock, awe, maybe fear. But beneath it all there was no anger, no sign of rejection. Grace's throat tightened, relief and apprehension tangling in her chest. Nathaniel took her hands again, searching her gaze. "Grace," he breathed, voice unsteady, "I don't know what to say. I never expected—" He trailed off, swallowing hard. "But I want to be here, for you, for this child. If you'll let me." Tears pricked her eyes. She'd braced for resistance or panic, but his earnest sincerity melted her defenses. "I'm scared," she admitted in a shaky whisper. "I'm not sure how to do this. Financially, emotionally, everything." He exhaled, forehead creasing. "We'll figure it out together," he promised. "Whatever you need, I'm with you, Grace." A soft sincerity radiated from him. No corporate facade, no guarded expression. Unable to hold back, she threw her arms around him, tears slipping free. His embrace was solid and reassuring. In that moment, despite the fear and the unknown path ahead, she felt a fragile sense of hope take root. Their worlds might be wildly different, but a deeper connection, one forged in a broken elevator and now bound by new life, had taken hold. Neither of them had all the answers. But for the first time, Grace truly believed they didn't have to face the questions alone. A new chapter was beginning, one that would forever reshape everything they thought they knew, and though the road ahead might be fraught with twists, they would walk it hand in hand, guided by a bond that had proven itself stronger than chance. Snow dusted the city in delicate white, reflecting the morning light in a wintry hush. At the modest apartment building where Grace lived, the holiday decorations still hung in the lobby, a cheerful wreath, a small fake tree with twinkling lights. It was early January, only a week into the new year, and the world outside looked almost peaceful, belying the emotional flurry inside Grace's heart. She stirred at dawn, rolling from her bed with a slight wave of nausea. Even this early in her pregnancy, morning sickness had become a persistent companion. Wrapping a robe around her shoulders, she wandered to the kitchen and brewed herbal tea, hoping it would soothe her uneasy stomach. Her gaze fell on the small ultrasound photo pinned to the refrigerator, a grayscale image from a recent doctor's visit. She still couldn't fully believe that tiny shape was real, part of her own life. Fingers trembling, she brushed the corner of the image, heart squeezing with a mixture of awe and nerves. Nathaniel had been there when the technician handed her the printout. He'd looked at it in wonder, then at Grace, murmuring, "This is our child." The memory brought a tearful smile to her face. Their child. It was a truth that still sent tremors of disbelief through her whenever she paused to think about it. She sipped her tea slowly, recalling the plans they'd started hashing out. Over the last few weeks, he'd asked 100 questions, offered 1,000 reassurances, financial support, doctor recommendations, even talk about rearranging his schedule so he could accompany her to every appointment. She was touched by his commitment, but also overwhelmed. Everything was moving fast, and neither had navigated these waters before. Class would resume soon, and Grace hadn't broken the news to her principal or her students yet. She dreaded the avalanche of questions and well-meaning but sometimes intrusive attention. Plus, she'd have to figure out maternity leave, her finances, and countless other details that loomed like a mountain range before her. The phone vibrated on the counter, drawing her out of her thoughts. She picked it up, seeing Nathaniel's name. "Good morning." His voice came, low and warm. "How are you feeling?" Grace pulled the robe tighter, surprised at how a simple greeting from him could calm her nerves. "A bit queasy," she admitted, "but I'm okay. I'll manage." A pause, then, "I was thinking, maybe we could meet for lunch, talk about some next steps, or if you prefer, I can bring lunch to you so you don't have to travel." She glanced at the clock. In a couple of hours, she needed to be at school to finalize lesson plans before the new semester. But the idea of seeing him, even briefly, lit a soft glow in her chest. "Lunch would be nice," she said quietly. "Maybe someplace simple near my school. I have a prep period around noon." "Perfect. I'll text you the details," he replied. His voice held a note of relief, as if he feared she might pull away. After hanging up, she found herself staring at her reflection in the mirror, hair mussed, eyes ringed with fatigue, but something like hope shining through. This was happening. She wasn't alone. And while she still had fears about her future, Nathaniel's busy world, the child growing inside her, at least they were confronting them together. That afternoon, she slipped out of her classroom during her prep period and made her way to a small bistro a few blocks from campus. Nathaniel was already there, seated at a secluded table near the back. He stood when he saw her, gently taking her coat. She noticed the faint lines of stress around his eyes. He'd mentioned back-to-back meetings this morning. Yet he offered her a soft smile that made the tension in her chest ease. "How was your morning?" he asked once they both sat. Grace shrugged lightly. "Busy, trying to get everything in order before the kids come back tomorrow. You?" "A whirlwind," he admitted, signaling to a waiter. "Board discussions, phone calls, a million little fires to put out. But I'm here now. That's what matters." She reached across the table, resting her hand atop his. "Thanks for making the time." He flipped his hand to entwine their fingers. "Always," he said simply. When the waiter arrived, they ordered quickly, a cup of mild soup for Grace, her stomach still iffy, and a sandwich for Nathaniel. The bistro buzzed with lunch-hour patrons, but their table felt like an island of privacy. Nathaniel leaned forward, brow knitting. "There's something I wanted to discuss. My schedule's brutal the next few weeks, but I want to be there for the next ultrasound, whenever you set it up." Her heart fluttered at the care in his tone. "We can schedule around you," she assured him. "I just appreciate that you want to come. Not all dads are that eager." She paused, sipping water. "I was thinking of telling my principal soon. I'll need some accommodations eventually." He nodded, thumb gently stroking the back of her hand. "That makes sense. If you want me there when you break the news at work, just say the word. Or if you need any extra help." Grace exhaled slowly. "It'll be a lot, but I'll manage. Though I can't pretend I'm not terrified." He swallowed, a flicker of vulnerability crossing his features. "Me too," he confessed in a low voice. "I never envisioned having a family this soon. Actually, I never really envisioned it at all. My father raised me to think only of the business, but I don't want to be like that." Her eyes softened. "You won't be. You care too much already. I can see that." When the waiter returned, they released each other's hands, focusing on the arrival of food. Grace took a cautious sip of soup, relieved it didn't upset her stomach. Nathaniel picked at his sandwich more than he ate it, clearly preoccupied by thoughts swirling behind his composed facade. After a while, he set his plate aside. "I want to do more than just show up at appointments. I want to figure out how we move forward, together." Grace's pulse stuttered. "What do you mean exactly?" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I know we've been dating, if that's the right word, but this changes everything. We're not just seeing where it goes, we have a life to plan for, a child." He exhaled. "I want you to know I'm fully invested. If you wanted to move in, or even if we discuss getting married eventually." She almost choked on her soup. "Married?" The word rang in her ears. She hadn't gone that far in her own mind, still processing the pregnancy itself. His cheeks colored. "I don't mean tomorrow, but we can't pretend we're just casually together, right? I want the baby to have a stable home. I want you to feel secure." Her eyes stung with sudden tears. I understand, and I appreciate you offering that. But Nathaniel, we barely know each other's day-to-day realities." He nodded, a trace of disappointment flickering in his expression. "You're right. I just don't want you to feel abandoned or uncertain." She smiled through the tears threatening to spill. "I don't feel abandoned, not with how you've been stepping up. But let's take this slow. We have time to figure out living arrangements and all the rest, as long as we stay honest with each other." Relief washed over him. He reached out, brushing a tear from her cheek. "Honesty. I can do that. I promise." They finished lunch at a more relaxed pace, the conversation weaving through baby name ideas. Grace insisted it was too soon to choose, doctor recommendations, and jokes about how to handle sleepless nights. Underneath the gentle banter was an undercurrent of wonder. Two people charting a course neither had expected, both grappling with excitement and fear in equal measure. When the check arrived, Nathaniel paid, despite her polite protest. Then he walked her out onto the snowy sidewalk. "Can I drop you back at school?" he offered. "I've got my driver waiting." She glanced at her watch, mind already returning to lesson plans. "I only have 15 minutes of free time left, but sure, that would help." They strolled toward his sleek black car, parked nearby. The city felt hushed under the fresh snowfall, tires crunching on wet pavement. As they neared the vehicle, Nathaniel's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, a call from one of his keyboard members. With an apologetic look, he answered, stepping aside. Grace waited, arms folded against the cold. She caught fragments of his conversation, something about share prices, an upcoming meeting. The contrast between that high-powered world and her own small classroom life felt stark. Yet despite how different they were, here they stood, forging a shared path. When Nathaniel finished the call, he slipped the phone into his coat. "Sorry about that." She just shook her head with a soft smile. "Part of your reality, right?" He nodded, opening the car door for her. "Let's get you back to school. I have another conference call soon, but text me when you're done tonight. We can talk more." Inside the car, she settled into the heated seat, grateful for the temporary reprieve from the cold. Nathaniel slid in beside her, instructing the driver to head to Riverway Middle School. The ride was brief, but he managed to hold her hand the entire way, fingers laced in quiet solidarity. When they arrived, he walked her to the school's front steps. Pausing at the door, he gently cupped her cheek, gazing into her eyes. "We're going to do this," he whispered, the cold air visible in puffs of breath. "I'm with you every step. You believe that?" Emotion thickened her throat. She nodded, covering his hand with hers. "I do." With that, she turned and hurried inside, the warmth of the building greeting her. But the warmth she felt in her chest was something else entirely, an expanding sense of trust. Later that evening, alone in her quiet apartment, she lay on the couch, a hand resting over her still flat abdomen. The pregnancy might not yet show, but inside she felt a stirring, a powerful promise of new life and new beginnings. She pictured Nathaniel's earnest gaze, his vow to be there. He might be a corporate titan in a skyscraper and she a modest teacher in a cramped classroom, but their child would bridge those worlds. She breathed in, counting each inhale to calm her thoughts. The months ahead would test them, no doubt. Family reactions, workplace arrangements, the practicalities of blending two very different lives. But she reminded herself that challenges had never stopped her before. She'd weathered foster homes, adversity, heartbreak. Now she had someone determined to stand by her side. A faint flutter of optimism rose within her. She sent a silent prayer of gratitude for the unlikely chain of events, a broken elevator, a midnight conversation, a bond she never saw coming. And as she drifted off to a restless but hopeful sleep, she dreamed of a future bright with possibility, one in which this child grew up knowing they were the thread that wove two souls together in the most unexpected, extraordinary way. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.